You're listening to the Feel Good Astrology podcast with Louisa Tannermunson. To request your personal reading, go to feelgoodastrology.com.
Hey, it's Louisa Tannermunson from Feel Good Astrology. Welcome to Pluto Through the Houses. This is episode 6, so this is Pluto Through the 6th house. And in this podcast, I'm going to be looking at what kind of themes come up if you were born with Pluto in the 6th versus what happens when Pluto is actually transiting through your 6th house. Now, I will be doing it from the perspective of the strengths of your Pluto position, the challenges, and also what you might want to consider in terms of Pluto's connection with other planets within your chart. For instance, is Pluto in good relationships with good aspects that are, say, trines and sextiles to other planets? Or do you find that your Pluto has more challenging aspects of squares and oppositions? Because that's also going to be touched upon. So if this is the first time you've listened in, so you're a new listener, welcome. I hope you find this really useful. And obviously, if you're a returning listener, I absolutely adore that. Thank you so much for reconnecting with me again, once again. That feels great. So there's a lot of different themes going on with Pluto. So many. Pluto is a planet of transformation. It really transforms our experience. It's known as being the god of wealth or power and the underworld. In particular, in mythology, you'll hear lots about Pluto. And if in fact that is something that you want to explore, then please do check out my Pluto in Aquarius podcast, which gives a really lengthy description of the mythology of Pluto. But essentially, Pluto shows us where we seek power. It shows us where we feel weak and vulnerable and how our ego is safety-proofing our life so that we don't fall victim to what we fear is going to actually happen. So it's about fear and how we control that fear. It shows us where we experience trauma, manipulation, sexual prowess, also imbalance in our energies, and also how enemies show up. From a spiritual point of view, Pluto is really showing us what we've got to yield to in terms of an outside or unseen power. And it's interesting because often when we're being triggered by a Pluto event, it does first of all come in as an outside or unseen power that feels almost impenetrable. And from experience, if you deal with it and kind of yield to it, realize that you might not be as powerful up against this unseen power or outside power. It's like when you have the humility with Pluto and yield to it and realize, okay, there's something in my life I can't really control here. And actually the whole purpose of this is to realize what you can control. So you might not be able to control anything other than the quality of your thoughts. And it's a really humbling lesson to learn because we really come face to face with our fears and with this feeling that we have to yield to something outside of ourselves. But, where we ignore the first time Pluto comes into our world to shake us up a bit, it often comes in later as a quite sensed and felt experience. And if we ignore that, it comes in as a person creating an experience. And it seems to then get worse and worse and worse. It's like the more you try to hide from it and run from it, the more it sees you, if that makes sense. So there's something quite shadowy about the whole idea of Pluto and power. I mean, if you think of him as the god of the underworld, and then if we think of people that we know, maybe through film or media or the news, there are themes of power being given to people who go to new places that we wouldn't necessarily go to. So there's also this feeling of how far will you go to get that power and how far will you go to get that wealth? And there's this understanding that maybe Pluto, the god of wealth and power, who lives in the underworld, would do some really awful things to get that level of power. And also we need to recognize that there might be some things that we say, no, I'm not going to do that just to get power and wealth. That's my line. I'm drawing a line there. At which point Pluto says, oh, really? You've got a line, do you? Let's see how you get on with that. And again, this like little power play comes up. So yeah, Pluto's showing us power plays. So let's have a look at Pluto now in terms of the 6th house and how it's showing up in particular. So 6th house then, some of the key words. The 6th house is really associated with Virgo, the star sign. And you might know Virgos, you might be a Virgo. And the Virgo energy is often a bit of an unseen hero. The Virgoan energy is very day-to-day, getting things organised, fit for purpose. It's about everything. It's about everything running well, work, health, routines. It's really what happens in the 9 to 5, Monday to Friday. But it's also the routines that happen outside of the 9 to 5 and what you're doing. In many respects, it shows us how we grow up. It shows us how we become an adult. It shows us how we might be ready for extra responsibility of relationships. It shows us how we manage our life when we've got extra responsibility. So Pluto in the 6th brings up all sorts of issues to do with running our life and our work and our health and our routines. So you might want to consider if Pluto is in the 6th at the time, place and date of your birth, you might want to ask yourself, where do I seek power to be in charge of managing my life experience? Often we have this sense of needing to control things because when we were growing up, either they were overly controlled or they just weren't controlled at all. So, for instance, if you grew up with parents that had absolutely no understanding of how to manage their life, how to pay their bills, if you had all the embarrassment and pain of growing up with not enough control over your environment, you may well become a little bit over motivated to control your existence and to be completely in control. You might also find that you've got control freak parents and you've grown up with that energy and you're fine with that energy and you've brought it into your own world. But wherever you're seeking power with Pluto in the 6th, it has to be in charge of managing your life experience. So it's being in control of your habits, being in control of the flow of your routines, very much about how you self-organize. You may well find that you are a dab hand at administrative roles or management roles, where you are organizing a whole bunch of uncontrollable aspects. And your role is to synchronize them and plan them and get everything working really, really well. What you fear is being out of control in terms of managing your life. So the little surprises that might show up on a day-to-day basis, this can't be allowed to happen. How do you safety-proof your life to ensure that you do what you say you're going to do, when you're going to do it, and how you're going to do it? It's like knowing ahead of time what is coming in and what is going out in terms of work, health, fitness, and you'll be controlling yourself and other people that come into your world accordingly to make sure that you don't have these slip-ups when you're not vulnerable to the effects of what happens when you don't take control. Now, that sounds kind of boring to a lot of people, but I'm guessing if this is you, you might actually like this and you might think, yes, that is how I like it and I need it to be like this. So, as you can tell from my own description, this isn't actually how I tend to do my life. My life is very spontaneous and kind of like the opposite energy, really. But that's not to say that I don't appreciate it. I just, as I'm listening to it, I'm thinking, God, that sounds really like it's pulling you into a really strict time frame. And I have to say, when I'm pulled into a strict time frame and managing so many tiny little pieces, at first there's a thrill, but long term I can't do it. I get ill. So it's obviously not for me. So, I've hit on something. The next big piece of this in the 6th house is health in terms of your routines, because the 6th house is where we also experience physical health issues. So when we have physical health issues, they tend to show up in the 6th. Now, Pluto can show us where we get sick. If we fear getting sick and Pluto's in your 6th, it's a perfect recipe for overwork, burnout, having a nervous breakdown, realizing that your routines and your work have driven your body to a place that you're not able to recover from as easily as you might have done, say, 10 years ago or even a year ago. So yes, there's lots to consider there. How is your pace of life? How is your need to articulate everything and manage everything? How is that supporting your health, and how is it negating your health? So you may well find that people with a strong Pluto in the 6th, have a really good gym routine, have a very strict diet. They keep their weight within a certain space, rather than going, oh my God, I'm like 3 stone heavier, now I need to do something. They will just monitor it from an early age and make sure it's always that way. People with Pluto in the 6th probably look very strong and powerful in the way that they dress, but probably very neat in the way that they do it. So yeah, there's a lot of organised, and you could say OCD. Again, it depends on your viewpoint. What you're really needing to learn, or what Pluto is trying to teach you here, is to let go of being perfectly organised, because Pluto is here to show you that, yes, you do have the power to control everything. You really could control pretty much everything, every routine in your life, and you could manage how people interact with you, but you still don't get the final say. If you're living with somebody else, they're also entitled to make their own decisions. If you're dealing with diets and things in shops, you might not be able to get the thing that you rely on, and so there's always going to be something that comes up to challenge you. And Pluto in the 6th is here to remind you that even though you may need to have these routines, it's not always going to work beautifully, and when it doesn't, it's going to be painful. So it's useful. So what you need to learn is to let go of being perfectly organised. It's to be a bit more relaxed around it. It can be very useful because you can get lots done, when you're organised. But truthfully, you're probably wired a bit too tightly, and at some point, there could be the looming feeling of it all going wrong, and then your beautifully organised life can go south. It can go really wrong quite quickly. So who's causing you the pain here? Because Pluto often shows up as a shadowy figure, like Scooby-Doo. You take the mask off. Who is Pluto here? Well, I think with the 6th house, it's pretty much you. So you can cause yourself the pain of needing perfection in everything. But it's causing you pain because it causes a lack of intimacy. It causes a lack of intimacy in relationships with people, like real relationships that are not based on equality. They're based on the need to have your own way. For instance, this is about your day-to-day running of your home and your house and your work and your life and your routines. So if you've got somebody that you're sharing your life with, and you're wound so tightly that it has to be a certain way for you to be able to survive it, and for you to feel comfortable and safe because you've got your routines, that's not a relationship based on somebody else's equality or somebody else's style being just as valid as yours. It's based on you having somebody that will accept your way. And so at some level, it's removing a level of intimacy, unless you can find somebody that is trying to manage their experience so perfectly that it matches with you. But you may well find that you end up managing your lives in a very separate way, which may well work for you. And it may just work for you for a period of time. But here's the thing with life. I think Pluto always reminds us of where natural law is. And, I'm a keen gardener. I love gardening. And I also like chickens and eggs and things like that. And I just love nature, really, in general. But, in the garden, I notice that, when you arrange everything in neat lines and you've got these strict watering schedules and you're doing everything according to some kind of risk analysis, you can have a garden and it could be quite successful, but it almost lacks the soul, because nature can't be controlled. I mean, it can be controlled and it can be managed, but nature by default is wild and it needs to express itself. Like there are some plants that need to outdo the others. There are some plants that actually are a little bit sickly and need to be thinned out. But treating them both the same because you're on a schedule is, there needs to be some kind of adaptation. And so, when I look at nature and how it's an intimacy, I think, in running these relationships between you and what's outside of you and what's in your life. So, for instance, in a garden, you never know when a white butterfly comes in and lays a load of caterpillars on your crucifers, on your lovely cabbage collection, or your rocket or something like that. You're always having to work not to your schedules, but to the schedule of nature and that place where you've co-created together. And I guess that is the next natural stage. Like when Pluto was in the 5th house, in terms of what you were learning when Pluto was in the 5th, it was to create things and to prepare for them to be themselves. Like you can't create things on your own because creation has like usually 2 dynamic forces to get it going. And so in your 6th, you're raising your creation. It's like, how do you manage your what you have already created? And so I think one of the things with who is causing you pain here, by controlling everything, you're not really getting a sense of what is natural and how nature runs its course. So your love life might be a little bit more transactional, based on outcomes and behaviours, and based on what you can do for me and what I'll do for you, and less on trust. There may well be a very justified reason as to why you can't just trust people. It's a bit like, I know in America, it's quite common for people to have prenups before they get married. I don't think it's the case for prenups in the UK, unless you're absolutely loaded, like there's some massive wealth inequality. But most people just, when they get married, or up until, I got married, sort of 10 years ago in the UK, it's mostly felt that, you put yourself in a vulnerable position with others. And so, yes, when you're managing your day and your work and your health routines, what happens on a 9-to-5 basis, it's not truly letting yourself be completely vulnerable. And so, how do you find freedom here? It's like, let yourself have a bad hair day and watch just how your world doesn't collapse. I mean, obviously, if you're in fashion or, if you've got to have your hair a certain way, it could collapse your world. But you may well find that when you allow yourself to be vulnerable, that there's a greater intimacy and that people like you more and that you have better relationships. Now, I do think this is much easier if you've got trines and sextiles to your Pluto at birth, because you can be more powerfully organised to work, and you're doing it in a way that's not creating loneliness. You're doing it in a way that is appreciated, by other people. But when you've got lots of squares and oppositions to your natal Pluto, you might find that your need to get things perfect is going to create problems for you and a deep wounding and sensitivity, almost like you feel like you have to do it to survive, and yet you understand that by doing it, it stops any chance of a relationship. I can think of an example. Now, I haven't had Pluto in my 6th or Pluto going through my 6th, but I've got Chiron in my 6th house, and I've experienced... what's the word? I can't even remember the word now, but I've experienced health issues in the past, autoimmune disorders in the past, and I've got out of them a few times. In fact, I've been very fortunate. People tell me I must have been misdiagnosed because when you get an autoimmune disorder, you don't get rid of them. But I beg to differ. But anyway, I'm not a doctor, so I'm not gonna I'm not going to insist. But in my experience, my personal experience, if you have a long-term illness, you might well need to create some new behaviours and boundaries for yourself to ensure that you're able to get better. For me, I think a lot of them, when I look at a spiritual level of illness and look at illness from a really holistic perspective, I can see that, one of the things I've been learning as I've got older is to learn how to deal with boundaries, and to not feel guilty about having solid boundaries. And And of course, once you start having boundaries, it becomes a bit of a chore. And it can be overly laboured. So, for instance, one of the things I learned, and that was more to manage my Chiron in the 6th, which causes us pain and wounding and health issues. But one of my ways of doing it was to have boundaries and to have a very strict diet for a period of time until I recovered. Now, the good thing with me is I'm not very persistent. Well, I'm seeing it as a benefit. So because I'm not that persistent, I haven't ever really created boundaries that I've maintained. But what kind of happened for me was I began to feel better and stopped fearing getting ill again. But I do know lots of people that have had autoimmune disorders who haven't been able to let go of the fear of it. And I'm not saying that's what's kept them in the illness. I'm not a doctor, like I said. But I do recognise that people who are able to let go of the fear of losing control in terms of their illnesses are more likely to recover. And I have met lots of people, who at the same time I was ill at the same time as them, and, who have continue to need boundaries and to manage their life based on a set of criteria, very much in this Pluto in 6th way. I must have it this way because otherwise I will not survive. Or if I don't have it like this, I can't relax. And if I don't relax, then I can't be well. And it creates intimacy issues for them because they may well end up spending all their time in a home or in a particular environment. And it's very difficult to have a really organic and natural existence with people when there are certain criteria in place. And so illness becomes a really big thing. And so if you have got Pluto, and this is now I'm getting to the big bit, which is, what happens if Pluto's coming into your 6th? I would say, as you see it coming, if you've had the chance to do that, get well, get healthy, and also sort out your emotional health. Like, where are you hurt? Where do you have issues that you can't talk about? Because all of these things, where you're not quite fit and wholesome and feeling complete, these are things that the Pluto energy can really kind of, what's the word? Dig its finger and stick its finger in a wound. Pluto will kind of aggravate anything that it sees as a vulnerability. So get relaxed about feeling healthy, not like I have to manage it like this or else, that's just asking Pluto to kick your butt. But if you're able to get yourself or find yourself in a state where you feel relaxed to have a clean home, relaxed to pay your bills on time, relaxed about how you eat and how you drink, and you basically have a good life, then if Pluto kicks your butt, you're already practicing being a bit relaxed, that it's not the end of the world if something goes wrong. And likewise, if you get poorly, you might not beat yourself up about it. I would say one of the biggest problems about Pluto in the 6th people, and also for when Pluto goes through the 6th, is that we beat ourselves up. We blame ourselves and we get very, very sort of judgmental of ourselves and others that stop us from living the life that we want to live. Final thought then for Pluto in the 6th would be that you might find that the whole pain and the thing that you're trying to avoid is actually the 9-to-5 lifestyle. So the 6th house is very regular. The 6th house is very narrative following. The 6th house is a bit like the Truman Show, if you've seen that film, where people get up every morning, Monday to Friday, 9 to 5. At the weekends, they go cycling or they go shopping, and they might go and see their friends on a Saturday night, And there's this kind of routine. It's very, very routine, and it's well-versed. And most people that live a life like that understand that their life survives because they follow set patterns which seem to work. But you might find that Pluto in the 6th creates the fear or creates the pain associated with having a really normal life. And so you might be stuck in the desire to have a normal life, but the knowledge that it's causing you pain, or you can't quite do it, or for some reason it doesn't go right for you, and you feel guilty because it works for everyone else. Why does it not work for you? So that's also something that could come up with Pluto in the 6th. But anyway, if you found this useful and you think it might be useful to unpack it in like a small online study group, then just get in touch to arrange it. It's louisatannermunson@gmail.com. Because I'm really happy to create these little study groups, where we can get together, we can talk things through, we can unpack things, we can learn from each other. Because I think with these Pluto aspects through our houses, our absolute best strategy is to accept where we might be vulnerable and to see it and to love that part of ourselves and to be able to talk about it and maybe even laugh about it a little bit. Obviously it brings up a lot of pain for us, but there is freedom when we can talk freely about it. So anyway, lots of love to you wherever you are in the world and whatever stage of life you're in as you're experiencing your Pluto in the 6th or Pluto going through your 6th. Lots of love to you. And if I can be any support, then just give me a shout. Bye for now.
You've been listening to the Feel Good Astrology podcast with Louisa Tanner-Munson. To request your personal reading, go to feelgoodastrology.com.